it's like we all have those people,
Yes,
right? I
definitely.
mean, for me, Jesse, it was Phil Woods, but then it quickly became Cannonball, it quickly became Charles McPherson, and was always Bird,
Yeah.
but and then Train and all the different you know tributaries from those kind of
Right.
huge contributors. But it's like creating a template where you can then take the information and assimilate what you're bringing in to then find your own thing.
Welcome to Keep Taking Ground, the Saxophone podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ryan, and today's guest is someone that I've had the pleasure of taking some lessons with, as well as he's been a really major influence on my own playing. He's been called one of the greatest alto players ever by the great Phil Woods. Talk about a compliment. He also won the Thelonious Monk International Jazz Saxophone Competition in 1996. He's had an amazing career as a leader, as well as playing with artists like Kenny Barron, Aretha Franklin, Harry Conrick Jr., Ron Carter, Ben Monder, Joshua Redmond, the New York Pops Orchestra, the Village Vanguard Orchestra, and the list goes on. It's really my pleasure to welcome Jon Gordon. Jon, welcome to the podcast. How are you
Oh,
doing?
thank you, Jesse. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure getting to know you over the last decade. I remember when I first came across your music, it was so inspiring because it was a period of time when I was back home living in Trinidad. And that period was really important for me because in my immediate environment, I didn't have a lot of musicians around me that were trying to play the music that I was passionate about. And so I had to be intentional about trying to find people around the world that was inspiring. And I would always reach out to them by sending an email or going to their website, checking out their music. And you were one of the people that I came across with. And the other thing that I really connected with too is that you had a really clear pedagogical approach to improvising with your book and your series that you had. So that was one of the main things that drew me to you back in 2011. We did some Skype lessons
I
and so on.
remember that, Jesse. Well, first of all, thank you. That's very kind of you. It's been great watching your journey, man, and I'm really glad to be a part of this and what you're doing, and look forward to what you're going to be doing musically and and in these kind of presentations going forward. Um, you were my first Skype student that I had in that kind of context. I remember I was on tour in Norway in '05 or '06, and some guys
Great.
like set me up with Skype, and I was in Japan on tour
Yes,
when
I
you,
remember
and I was
that.
like, I was like doing, wait, I'm in Japan, he's in Trinidad, and so that was when, I mean, the 21st century is like any time period is an odd mixed bag, but that
Yeah,
technology that where we can be, especially with what we're going through in the world right now, right? Thankfully,
yeah,
we have this ability to connect that we didn't have,
yeah.
let's say in the last century. And so, yeah, so that was really, really fun to work with you.
Yeah, and this podcast is really for both the professional and aspiring professional saxophone player, and I really believe that there's a gap in between those two things. The award-winning, in-demand saxophone player um, knows something that the rest of us don't yet know, and that's what I'm really curious about in this series of interviews with some of my musical heroes and just award-winning and in-demand saxophonists from all around the world. Um, and the name of the podcast is Keep Taking Ground, and I really want to encourage people to keep taking ground in their own professional and creative journeys. So let's talk now about sort of what is your ground. Um, and let's start by talking about how you began playing the saxophone, and then what were you in pursuit of? What are you in pursuit of? And sort of what are some of the things that really define um, or I guess some of the values of your heroes and
Mhm.
some of the things that your heroes were in pursuit of musically, professionally, and creatively.
Hmm. Well, it's funny. I always joke about it. When I was a little kid, I always wanted to play the saxophone, and they kept putting me in the choir, and like, and we always singing the greatest hits from The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
When you're 8, 9, and 10, it's a little rough after a while. Finally, in junior high school, I got to play saxophone. I come from a musical family.
Okay.
It's a very complicated background. I actually wrote a book about it called For Sue. Um, there was a guy on Staten Island named Bill Dicey that ran a blues jam session at a place called Dan Lynch on 14th Street and 2nd Avenue. His
Okay.
daughter and I went to junior high together.
So you grew up in New York.
I did. Grew up in Staten Island, New York.
Cool.
I had a great, we had a great music instructor there named Larry Lorenzano.
Cool.
He eventually got me free lessons through the Jewish Community Center.
Okay.
And he said, I'm not Jewish and you're not Jewish and Caesar Moore's not Jewish, but I got you free lessons I was like, okay, like and Caesar was a local legend. And actually the JCC continues to be a great place for the arts, and I believe they're still giving kids lessons and oftentimes coming up with these scholarships based on need. And I
Yep.
definitely was a kid that did not come from a financially solid background, to say the least. So I was very blessed to have Larry and Caesar. And then simultaneous to studying with Caesar, Mr. Lorenzano got me an audition at Performing Arts High School.
Okay.
And that really changed my life. That really changed my concept of what was possible musically.
Okay.
My audition piece there was a concert band piece selection from Rocky,
Okay.
we played these little Sousa marches or whatever, and a couple of, movie themes and things, but we loved it. We had a great community and we really loved music. So for me and like a lot of people I know, music was the thing that basically got us through and gave us something to focus on, to aspire to, and to hope for, a
Right.
way out sometimes, to put it that way.
Yeah. So let's talk now about where your journey continue on, how your journey continued on from that point. What were you in pursuit of, or what are you in pursuit of? What let's define what your ground has been.
Okay. Um, just to quickly connect
Yeah.
from to that, I had amazing experiences at Performing Arts High School.
Okay.
At that time, like the year that I started, that's where the movie Fame came out, and there were all these artists. That's where I met. Now, Bill Charlap was there, who's been one of my best friends.
Okay.
Stephen Scott and Justin Robinson were also there when we were there. Jay Rodriguez, um, just amazing. And so it just coming from my background, it really raised my sense of what was possible. I became friends with some amazing classical musicians, one of whom is a good friend of mine still, Eleanor Bidman, who's a brilliant pianist.
Okay.
And so then I went on to from performing arts to Manhattan School of Music.
Okay.
Around the end of Performing Arts High School, I got to study with Phil Woods and Charles McPherson. Spent some time with Charles, which was amazing. And then when I went to Manhattan School of Music, I studied with Joe Allard for 3 semesters,
Wow.
which was amazing. And who, as
Yeah.
saxophone players, we know Joe.
Yeah.
He was around 80, late 70s, turning 80 when I met him. He would sort of forget you from one lesson to the next in terms of you might not remember your name or the progress, but I got
Right.
so much from him, and he was very inspirational. He was very thin and wiry, he seemed much stronger, and he was like strong and fit, and he had the energy of like a teenager or something.
Wow.
It was very interesting. And I had a great year with Bob Mintzer. I mean, just an amazing year with Bob Mintzer. I also took some individual lessons with people like Lovano, Dick Oates,
Yeah.
Bob Berg. And I was spending a lot of time with people like Eddie Locke and Eddie Chambly. I was sitting in with Eddie Chambly at Sweet Basil's, and
Okay.
Eddie Locke became almost like a father to me. He got me an apartment in his building, great drummer. He's actually my first interview in my book about jazz musicians.
Nice.
So they were all a big part of what I was doing and becoming, and I loved the tradition. And when I heard Phil Woods when I was 16, Jay Rodriguez played me and Curtis Haywood, another saxophonist we went to school with, is a terrific saxophonist as well. and we were listening to. You mentioned, I think we were talking about Irakere and Paquito. I
Yeah.
think that might come up in conversation with us. And so he played us Paquito because actually Jay was taking some lessons with Paquito at the time,
Okay.
and he played us Phil, and I was blown away by both of them. And I felt like when I heard Phil, like I felt like this is why I'm playing this instrument. It just codified things because
Yeah.
I was playing the Charlie Parker solos in the Omni book, but I wasn't listening as much. I didn't make the connection when I listened to the records as to the page. Sometimes what I find
Okay.
as an educator is there are different things that will open a door for you. It could be the visual of like reading the solos. Like when I read the solos, like that was like, wow, like I really loved it. Sometimes I'd hear the old scratchy records and I didn't make the connection as
I
much.
had that same experience when I started listening to recordings because the very first week that I started playing saxophone, I was gifted two recordings. One was from a local saxophonist in Trinidad called Francis Prime,
Mm-hmm.
and another one was a Kenny G record. And for me, the quality of those recordings were contemporary, clean, crisp.
Right.
And when I listened to Charlie Parker, because I also had access to his recordings early on, I just didn't get it because of the quality of the recordings, you know. So I think that's a common, I guess a stumbling block or barrier to entry for
Yep.
lots of people. Yeah,
Yep.
that's interesting that you had that experience too.
When I was like 13, 14, like, you know, there was a couple things, like my mother had some records around. She had a
Mm-hmm.
couple of records by her husband, who was a great baritone saxophonist named Bob Gordon. And I
Nice.
talk about that in the book. I have a complicated backstory,
Yeah.
but the fidelity of it was good. It wasn't like a live record at Birdland.
Okay.
Now, you know, Bird live at Birdland with Art Blakey and Fats Navarro, like Fats' last record, that's one of the greatest jazz records ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But if you don't know the language and you don't know the context and you're just a
Right.
kid and you hear all this scratchiness and all
Yeah.
people like, you know, in the audience and stuff, you're like, you know, but we had Ben Webster meets Jerry Mulligan. My mother had some Frank Sinatra and some Glenn Campbell
Mm-hmm.
records, and a couple of Beatles records. So there was
That
like,
Ben Webster album is a great one.
oh man,
Yeah.
and all, yeah, and yeah, that's a great record.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, but I made that connection through my friend Jay playing me that Phil Woods record, and then I heard Cannibal. I said, oh my God, and then I heard Bird, you know, and what was happening simultaneous to that is Bill Charlap was constantly playing me music
Right.
because he was just immersed. He was always at the piano.
Yeah.
Like, you got to listen to this WC piece. You got to listen to Stravinsky conducting Stravinsky on The Rite of Spring and the Firebird. You got to check out Weather Report. You got to check out Chick Corea three quartets. You got to
Yeah.
check out Jocko Word of Mouth. And I was like, and so that was a huge blessing for me. So that was kind of what my thing was. And I always loved the whole history of the music. You know what I mean? Like I was always intrigued. Um, but I think I started with really just trying to get inside of bebop and bebop language in 251 because Phil Woods, what he gave me when I studied with him, and it took me a while to be able to, but he gave me, he made that connection for me as well of like, okay, here's a standard, here's the chord changes, what are the scales that you play, and it was just a couple of simple things that he did, and he was making fun of me at the time. He's like, I'm going to start collecting from you now because you're going to be teaching this for the next 50 years, and sure enough, that was like 1980. It was February of 1984, and I still teach it. It's part of, you know, and it's like we all do it. You get stuff from different teachers. I got stuff from Caesar DeMoro. I
Yeah.
got stuff from Phil. I got stuff from Charles. I got stuff from Bob Mincer, Jim McNeely, Richie DeRosa, who was a teacher at Manhattan School of Music. You know, we're always kind of,
Yeah.
I remember what Clark Terry said, imitate, assimilate, innovate. You know,
Right.
I
So
love that phrase.
so how did having all of those influences from such an early age, like in your teens, meeting some of those great musicians and being mentored, how did that shape your direction, and then also how did it help you define what you were going to pursue in music?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of moments.
Okay.
There's a lot of moments. I remember Charles McPherson and I sitting talking, and him talking about kind of the spirituality behind music
Mm-hmm.
and different realizations that he came to. I remember showing up at a lesson with Phil Woods, and the night before, one of his mentors, Bud Johnson, had passed away, and he was just heartbroken.
Yeah.
And his stepdaughter, Kim Parker, who was Charlie Parker's stepdaughter,
Mm-hmm.
and he picked me up at the bus station. And she comes into the bus station. I get off the bus. I come in the back of the car, and Phil turns around and says, you know, don't come to my house unless you're trying to change the world. I
Wow.
know too many good people that have lived and died for this music, you know. And I was like,
Wow.
you know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing I loved about those guys. Eddie Locke. I mean, I remember Eddie. There was a thing Eddie Locke told me. There was this big tribute to Zoot Sims, and he said there were all these people there that were full of crap, talking about how much they love Zoot Sims. They said, and he said, I listened to this all night. I finally got up at the end of the night. He's like, you run a jazz festival, you run a club, you run you got a little record company. You could have actually done something for Zoot and gave him a gig.
Right.
You know, I you know, I think I was raised by some of those kind of people, you know,
Okay.
that were very honest and from the heart,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like I remember, you know, Eddie's son saying, "You always knew where you stood with my father," and that's a blessing, you know, because if somebody really cares about you, the truth is a gift.
Yeah.
You know, people
Yeah.
can play you and try to be like, well, how do I want to, you know, but I mean, you know, it's like, and I remember he quoted Thad. You know, he knew Thad from Detroit, and he said, "Say what you mean what you say," right? And so you know, and that's so the music means something. You know, it's not just. It's very difficult to put in words
Yeah.
in a you know brief half hour or so,
Yeah.
um, but it moved me. You know, when you have that experience when you're in the Vanguard or Sweet Basil's or some of these clubs that I was at,
Yeah.
and something happens in the room and you just feel it. It's that transcendent thing where, like, to me, it's truth telling. Like we were talking about this yesterday.
Yeah.
Like there's very few arts that have what we have as jazz musicians because we have that in the moment process that you could the only you know you can think of like somebody like Jackson Pollock throwing paint on the canvas, but we have that as jazz musicians. It's such a beautiful creative process when you see it at a high level. But then
Right.
from a composition and arranging standpoint, we also have the way a sculptor or a painter
Right.
or somebody writing a screenplay. Like we have that, and that combination, man, it's really it's a to me it's like it's just an exciting combination when you see those elements come together.
And then of course
Um,
you have the element of the collaborative thing where we have conversation
Absolutely,
as well. Yeah.
because a painter or a sculptor is solitary.
Right. Right.
With us, it's like yeah. So it's and then we were talking a little bit about like Richard Pryor and George Carlin and
Right.
you know that in the moment those great comedians
Yeah.
that are profound truth tellers,
Wow.
you know, that also have that, you know, and they're writing their stuff, but they also, there's
And
that
so
storytelling.
that idea you feel as though it helped you kind of define what you were going for in your music. You were always going for telling truth through your music.
I think, yeah, I think being moved by music is what made me want to move other people.
Right.
And the thing that I find moving you know, I think somebody just coming from their truth,
Hmm.
you know, and having a passionate story to tell. And
Wow.
it can manifest in a lot of ways, you know. Um, you and I have talked about this also in the past, that Paul Desmond Charlie Parker interview. And Bird says there's stories and stories to tell through music, you know. And everything cool there?
Yeah, just have to plug in my laptop. We're good.
Oh, no problem. So,
Yeah.
but Bird said there's stories and stories to tell through music,
Yeah.
and I love that, you know. And I always think about how like if Stravinsky was walking into a jazz club, you know, Bird would play like ba da 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 da, you know, from Petrushka or something,
Mm-hmm.
or if it was a Sunday, he might quote, I need a Sunday kind of love, or, that kind of stuff. And where he's reacting to things, and it can be very surface and in the moment. And it
Right.
can also be it can have be multi-layered, multi-dimensional, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah. You know, I was talking to another person about this recently in terms of the cultural um, element of the music and the significance of community in the music and being aware of those things and bringing it into to the music, and then also music having an element of humor
Yes.
in it. Bird for me is has become like the embodiment of like joy. When I listen to his playing, that's the one emotion that I feel all the time, and that's something that um I'm in pursuit of in my own playing, to try to bring the element of joy
Mm.
in all the time. So let's talk about now about something about your book that you've been working on,
Mhm.
and also what are some of the things musically that you think set apart um, the award-winning in-demand saxophone player from the, let's say, aspiring saxophone player?
There's two or three things that come to mind immediately. A lot of it sounds overly simplistic, but I will just tell you, I have taught all over the world, and I'm thankful, these experiences and meeting people, and like I look at what people I've met and worked with have gone on and done, and I'm very
Yeah.
happy for them and proud of them.
Mm-hmm.
What they all have is that they all really learned the language. They always started with what I would consider kind of like a real humility towards just the foundations of
Yeah,
music.
the tradition, yeah. Or the
Yeah,
foundations, yeah, yeah. Got you.
like I see a lot of people that they're trying to get to deep art very quickly.
Got you.
And I don't think there's a shortcut in this music, in my experience, unless you're just a complete genius and
Right.
you're just going to pick up an instrument and you're just going to hear it.
Yeah.
But if you're counting on being a genius, man, you know what I mean? Like that's a little rough, because if you're
Yeah.
not, you're going to be like 38 and being like, why am I not working?
Right.
So, and that's the thing I always feel, um, as a teacher, I'm like, look, I can tell you what I really, really know from experience you need. Learn the major scale in all 12 keys on your instrument. Learn the three minor scales. Play them in intervals.
Right.
Learn how to then apply those scales to basic harmony.
Right.
Those three steps right there. If you do that, you have what I call functionality. But you got to have that.
Right.
Um, I think, the thing that sets there's that basic thing, and then there's kind of like the further things. I think sound and time,
Sound and time. Yeah.
like just from a very simple, down to earth, grounded, like every great jazz musician to me has a great sound, and hopefully an identifiable sound. And that leads to the whole concept of the book, which is what does it mean to be a stylist, which was introduced to me. That word was introduced to me when I was 20 by the great Jay McShann.
Right.
And you can, the way he used that word had almost a kind of reverence. Guys
Okay.
need to understand in the next generations of what it means to be a stylist. It's not necessarily that they played their instruments in such an incredibly impressive way, but they played in their way, right?
Okay. Got
And
you.
that's what the music is. Eddie Locke talked about that. He said, man, all those great piano players I came up with in Detroit, Tommy Flanagan, Roland Hanna, Hank Jones, Barry Harris, all great, but all totally different.
Right.
That's really what the music is. It's not like, you know, everybody trying to get, the most impressive technique. I mean, yeah, you want that, but it's got to be a means to an end. If it's like, hey, look at all the stuff I can do.
And I,
Okay.
I feel like if that is also tied to the idea you're talking about earlier of truth in music and just playing truthfully. Um, when I was at Berkeley, I did my first year at Berkeley, and one of the courses I took there was called a survey of woodwind styles,
Hmm.
and that term stylist came up, but it was more of a binary idea where you were either playing bop or post bop. There were like these set categories of what it meant to be a stylist. But I feel as though the way you're using the word is slightly, it goes beyond that slightly. It's not just about these categories, but more about developing a personal sound on the
Yes.
saxophone.
The way you know, and it was so wonderful. I was telling you about this, this Brazilian saxophone
Yeah,
festival that I was a part of, and I did a presentation, and Lovano and some other, and boy, listening to Lovano's presentation was so great. And the way he put it is, and you know, these are things I've heard him say, and he said to me when I took a lesson with him, it's like, you know, your concept about your sound, how you're going to play each note of the melody.
yeah,
I, I'll give you a perfect example. Errol Garner. Nobody sounds like Errol
no,
Garner. I mean, and if you stop and think about what he's doing time wise, his left hand is one place time wise. It's usually like right in the pocket or even a little bit on top of the beat. His right hand is varying degrees behind the beat at times. And he's playing straight eighth notes, almost classically sounding at times.
mm-hmm.
He's playing slightly more swung. He's playing very in the pocket swung, triplety eight. I mean, all these different concepts that he brings that are just completely personal to him.
Right,
Ben Webster. Nobody
yeah,
sounds like Ben Webster. These are
yeah,
stylists. Um, I'll give you another guy. Complete stylist, total original, Paul Desmond.
right,
I mean, you know, Dave Brubeck's concept in music is beautiful, but without Paul, I mean,
right,
Paul brings so much to it. And who sounds like that in the history of the instrument? I'll give you a guy that I talked about in the book. Benny Carter told me, and I forget how his name came up, but he said he thought Dave Sanborn was one of the great stylists in the history of the alto. And it's for sure true.
yeah,
I remember when I
definitely,
was a kid in the 80s and I was just first getting into the music as a teenager, like everybody was kind of trying to sound like Sanborn or Phil Woods on the alto and
right,
Brecker on the tenor, you
yeah,
know. And you know what's interesting is guys that you never get there. You know, you never
right,
what it but and I talked about this in my interview in the book with Steve Wilson. It's like those we all have those people,
yes,
right? I
definitely,
mean, for me, Jesse, it was Phil Woods, but then it quickly became Cannonball, it quickly became Charles McPherson, and was always Bird, you know.
yeah,
But and then you know, Train and all the different, you know, tributaries from those kind of, you know,
right,
huge contributors. But it's like creating a template where you can then take the information and assimilate what you're bringing in to then find your own thing.